2, excuse me, 3, 1, go. Well, hi everybody. Here we are again. It's Monday. It's 1 o'clock, and we are beginning or continuing our discussions of Pirkei Avot and things that sort of pertain thereto and develop thereto and are deduced therefrom. Okay. We are now moving on to, I think, one of the more dramatic and interesting periods in ancient Jewish history, which is the period of the civil wars. We talked about them a little bit, between the various heirs of the Hasmoneans, which led ultimately to the Roman conquest and the end of Jewish independence in Judea, and then to the time of, it's interesting, the time of Roman conquest, Roman sovereignty, time of Herod, and then the building of the Beit HaMikdash is also the same time that there was a tremendous flourishing of Jewish scholarship and Jewish creativity in the land of Israel. It reminds me, I don't think it's exactly the same, but it reminds me of something that a teacher of mine once wrote. One I've been privileged, and I've had a chance to talk about a lot of my teachers of late. But one of the people who had a profound impact on me in many, many ways was a man whose name was Rabbi Yeshayahu Wolgemuth, Rabbi Isaiah Wolgemuth, Zecher Tzadik Livracha. Rabbi Wolgemuth was the scion of a long and distinguished German Jewish rabbinic family. And in fact, he was the youngest rabbi in the city, I think in Germany, but certainly in the city of Kissingen in the 30s. In fact, he was the rabbi there until he left in the wake of, he was told after Kristallnacht, that's what made me think of it. He was told in the wake of Kristallnacht, after he was arrested and sent to a concentration camp, that he had 2 weeks to get out of Germany, or else. And he left, and he came to America, and he settled in Boston, which is how I knew him. Most Boston religious Jews knew him as a teacher, as a fine teacher, as a wonderful teacher, and as a gentle, wonderful man. At Maimonides School, I knew him as my teacher at Boston Hebrew College, because Hebrew Teachers College, especially the high school, because he's teaching the summers. And we used to go to summer school, and I had him. In fact, he was the first person to teach me Gemara. Not only was the first person to teach me Gemara, he was the person who encouraged me in my learning. And it was he who approached Rabbi Soloveitchik and asked and urged him to let me attend his advanced summer classes. I don't know what had gotten into me that I thought I was ready for this, but advanced summer classes at the Maimonides School in 1973, which is when I started my discipleship with Rab Soloveitchik, and the rest is history. So he was best known. Interesting, even though he was a teacher of Talmud, he was best known as a teacher of Biur HaTfilah, of the understanding and appreciation of liturgy, and much that I've told you in terms of the understanding of the liturgy, especially when we did our sessions about Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. A lot of it comes from things or sensitivities that I developed under his tutelage. In any case, he wrote a lovely book called A Guide to Jewish Prayer, which I strongly, strongly recommend. It's available on Amazon. In which he writes about the fact that the mid-30s, after 1933, were the halcyon days of German Jewry. And he says, you probably think that I'm crazy, because the Germans came into power and they started throwing Jews out of jobs and things were terrible. He said, no, that's true. All that's true. And he himself went through Kristallnacht and spent time in a concentration camp. But he said during those 5 years, between 1933 and 1938, when the Jews were increasingly restricted, they actually started pouring back into the synagogues, and they discovered themselves, and they returned to their heritage, and they derived from being Jewish and from Jewish learning and from Jewish activities and from just what we call in Israel the biyachad, the being together. They discovered they derived tremendous strength and ability and resilience, and they'd be able to withstand under terrible circumstances. So I think of that when I think of the fact that actually under the when the Romans started, is when you begin to have this real upsurge in Jewish creativity. The two figures that are most associated, and that brings us back to the Mishnah, the two figures that are most associated with the beginning of this upsurge are, ironically enough, converts. Their names were Shemaiah and Avtalion. Shemaiah and Avtalion, both of whom were either themselves converts to Judaism, or were the children of converts. So this is some difference of opinion historically. They became scholars of such incredible magnitude that they reached the height of achievement and became the heads of the academy. They became the heads of the Sanhedrin, which is something which is really quite remarkable, especially since apparently they converted as adults, which means that they started from zero, which should teach us a lot in terms of ourselves. First of all, those people who were raised religious should appreciate the fact that they got a chance to start young. Those people who came to religion or converted should never give up hope that, oh, they know so much and everybody else knows so much and I'm never going to make it and so on and so forth. It's not true. I mean, those are the facts, but it doesn't mean that these are insurmountable. Obstacles. With determination and with persistency and consistency, one can reach whatever goal in the learning of Torah and in one's piety that one desires. As Master Yoda was wont to say, there is no, do or do not do, there is no try. They did, and I think that they're an exemplary example for everyone. Now, it's interesting, there's a story about Shemaiah and Avtalion, and I will have a lot more to say about Shemaiah and Avtalion next week, because I did mention to Rabbi Constantine that I'm going to talk about the first part of Shemaiah's first statement, which is Ehavat Lecha, to talk about labor. But I think there's one story that I think requires retelling now. The path of the Baale Teshuva and the path of the convert, people who come into the religious community or the Jewish world late, is not always paved with roses. There is a not insignificant amount of clannishness. There is not an insignificant amount of who's this Johnny come lately. There is not an insignificant amount of emphasis on personal genealogy of family, of good breeding, of what's known in Hebrew as yichus. All of these things indeed do exist, and both converts and Baale Teshuva, and I think we need to emphasize this, encounter that. When a Baal Teshuva, when a person or a convert who comes to the community and reaches a very high level of distinction, that is really something amazing. In fact, I'm not going to compare myself or anybody else to him because he was an amazing genius. But recently we've had such a terrible annus horribilis this year, with the passing of so many phenomenal teachers of Torah, like Reb Nachum Rabinovich and last week, a week and a half ago, Rabbi Sachs. But I want to make a point about Rabbi Steinsaltz. Rabbi Steinsaltz grew up in a communist home. His father was a communist. And yet, he was Choser B'Tshuva, and he revolutionized the Jewish world. Now, not everyone is going to be Rabbi Steinsaltz, because you're not supposed to be. You're supposed to be whoever you're supposed to be. But the point is that there definitely are obstacles that have to be overcome. Why am I telling you this? Whether that kind of attitude, of sort of snooty attitude of the people who are always religious or always here, is justified or not, which I don't think it is at all. Certainly, as a person who came from a traditional but not an Orthodox background. There's a story in the Talmud in Brachot that says a lot of, not so much about the converts or the Baale Teshuva, and not so much about the people inside the who are snooty, but about everybody else. I'm not going to go into the details, but the story is that there was a bunch of cases that came up before the rabbis in the time of Shemaiah and Avtalion. And one of them involved the rights or the obligations of a convert. And the question at bar was whether the laws of Sotah apply to a convert. Unfortunately, a case where one of the people involved there was betrayal in a marriage, and they want to do trial by ordeal sota. Does that apply to a convert or not? The circumstances I don't think are all that important. And at the time, Shemaiah and Avtalion ruled that in fact no, there's no difference between Jews from birth and converts, what they call Jews by choice today. And somebody in the crowd, nasty, narrow-minded person, looked out and said, dugmas and hishkua. They're converts, so they're always looking out for the converts. In other words, this is not a principled position. They're just trying to get places where they're not supposed to be. What's striking is the response of the rabbis, of the colleagues. They put that person in cherem. They excommunicated him. They put that person under interdict. Why? For a very simple reason. Because it is yes, there are going to be nativists, let's call them that, who are going to have all kinds of things to say about Johnny-come-latelys, whether they're Baale Teshuva or converts. There are going to be all kinds of obstacles. The obligation, and you probably can't stop the existence or the loudmouth rantings of some people. However, it is the responsibility of the community to support, to back, and if need be, sanction, to back people who join the community of their choice, and to celebrate their choice, and to sanction those who would stand in the way, those who would hurt the newcomer. Now, the Torah itself already does this, not so much in terms of Baale Teshuva as opposed to converts, because the Torah says in 36 different places you should not oppress a convert. What do you mean oppress? It doesn't mean you take a whip. Don't whip them. It means don't hurt their feelings. Don't hurt their feelings. And we have an obligation to make sure, to stand on tippy toes to make sure that doesn't happen. So that Shemaiah and Avtalion, for the population that comes to Torah, for the circumstances that led them, for which they were not, born that way, whether they were not born that way or they were not born that way because they're, for whatever reason, their ancestors, their parents, whatever, grew distant from the Torah, the obligation of the community to support them and even to see them reach the top of the Jewish community and of the top of the yeshiva world, or the top of the rabbinic world, the top of top positions of leadership, is ironclad. Anyways, that's sort of introduction to Shemaiah Italian. We'll talk about their historical background in a sec. I want to let's go straight into the first thing that Shemaiah says. Shemaiah says we are in chapter 1. We're up to Mishnah 10. Go now. Shemaiah Avtalion kiblu mehem. Shemaiah and Avtalion were the disciples of Shimon ben Chetach and Nitai ha'Arbeil. And so Yehuda ben Tabai, sorry. He used to say, Omer, ehov et hamalacha, love, labor, trade. We'll see in a minute what that means. Love work. Usna et harabanut, and hate the rabbanut. Hate the rabbinate? Hate authority. We'll have to really look into what he's saying to. And then, according to many, many versions, there's a third line, which is ve'al titvada l'rashut, and don't become familiar with the government. Now, it's very strange. What do those three things have to do with each other? So what we're going to try to do over the next 3, I think it's going to take us 4 weeks. I hope you have patience, but I think it's going to take us 4 weeks to get through this Mishnah, because even though there are very few words involved, it's a packed full of information. I'm reminded, again, I'm not comparing myself certainly, but at least I'm following in a good path. There was one year I was not studying with Rabbi Soloveitchik in New York at the time, But there was one year that, I don't even know what the reason was that they decided to do this, but there was one year that Rav Soloveitchik decided that instead of just plowing through Gemaras, that they were going to do what's called a Seder B'kiyut. They were going to do they're going to study to go to sort of get, not just to analyze, but also to sort of get a breadth of knowledge in some topic. So he chose Mishnayot Chala. The Mishnayot among the agricultural section of the Mishnah called Seder Zra'im, it deals with challah. Challah, like you make, what we call challah really isn't challah. Challah is a bread. It's a loaf of bread. What we call challah is simply a loaf of bread that we serve on Shabbat. Challah really means, and that's what it says in the Torah. Challah really refers to the fact that when you have a certain amount of dough, when you're making a load of baked goods, it's big enough, you have to give a certain amount to the priest, and that's what they were going to discuss. So, all right, fine. So they started learning. So, in addition to the normal Talmud class, they were studying these Mishnayot, which are very short little units, just like the Mishnayot in Avot, a little more technical, but you can go zipping through. There are people who go through all of the entire Mishnah in a not significant amount of time. And they're going, and they're going, and they're going, and after a few months, 6 months, 7 months, whatever it was, they studied 6 Mishnayot, which is not B'kiyut. B'kiyut, you go plowing through, and you go running through, and so on. So they said, Rabbi Soloveitchik, you said this was going to be B'kiyut. We weren't going to analyze. We were just going to, get a sense of what it's about and go further. So he says, yeah, but you have to understand. In other words, there's no such thing as just going through. You have to really understand what you're doing. If you don't do that, then what good is your learning? There's a famous story that's told about Rabbi Lichtenstein, Zecher Tzadik Livrocha, Rabbi Soloveitchik's son-in-law, and the Rosh Hashiva of Har Etzion, that he objected to this kind of sort of like flying through. He was not a Daf Yomi Jew, put it that way. And he used to call sort of running through Gemaras just to get a feel for the overall sense. He used to call it study so as not to understand. So anyways, we're going to have to, and this Mishnah requires time, so that I hope that you'll bear with me. Let's start with Ehov et Hamlacha. Ehov et Hamlacha, love labor. Now, when you look at this Mishnah actually raises, every single word is pregnant with implications. Love your work. So what does that mean? So, one issue that comes up is the value of labor. Is work a good thing, or is it a bad thing? Is it a necessary evil, or is it something you should really try to cultivate because it's actually good? That's number one. I don't think we even think about it. Yeah, of course you have to make a living because otherwise you'll starve. And if you want to get married and you want to have children, then you have to make a lot of money. That's no chachmas. But is there value in that per se? Now, in other words, if you go to work just to make money, and that's a value. In fact, Rashi and other Meforshim say the reason you got to go to work is otherwise you're going to become a thief because you need money to make a living. You need money to live. So if you don't go to work, then you're going to end up stealing, or you'll get into gambling, or you'll rob people. I don't know. You'll do all kinds of stuff. So being honest, of course, is part of the prime directive of the Torah. So you go get a job. But that's a very utilitarian view of work. That means that what you do is a question of what's the most you're going to get out of it. The thing per se, the value of the activity per se, is not part of that consideration. Certainly not necessarily part of that consideration. So that's question. So does work per se have value, or is it necessary evil? Would it be better for us to not have to work, for example? Question number 2 is choice of our labor. Say, irrespective. Say, what do you mean love work? It should have said go to work. If the whole thing was just to go, the question of making a living, say, go to work, get a job. We're going to talk about the Haredi dogma of not working, but we'll get to that not today. But there's a famous story of I don't know if it's true or not, but I hope it's true, that a yeshiva guy who was married and had kids went to Reb Chaim Kanievsky, and he had heard that if you say this pair of tillim together with something else, and you stand on your head and whatever it is, that's a good school. In other words, that's sort of like a magical amulet for making a living. So he went to Rabbi Chaim Kanievsky and asked him, should I say this, do this, this magical thing to be able to make a living? And Rabbi Chaim Kanievsky apparently said, you know what the best school for making a living is? Get a job. It doesn't mean you have to love it. And what's your choice of job? What are your considerations? The amount of time it takes. I mean, we all know people who work 24/6 and 24/7. In fact, modern day, even though we talk about slavery, but modern day employment can be a form of slavery. Is often a form of slavery, even if it pays a lot. I had a neighbor who passed away not long ago, a number of years ago, who was a lawyer, and the lawyer and his friends used to say to him, "Look, you keep going back." He used to commute between the United States and Israel. That you keep going back and forth to Israel. I'd love to go to Israel sometime, but I have no time. So my neighbor said, you're a slave. So love work. I mean, it's an issue. I will, in answer to that question, to try to define that, we'll get to that as well, I think. One of the nicer comments, I think, was made by, and I think it reflects the 19th century, by Rabbi Yisrael Lifshitz. Rabbi Yisrael Lifshitz was a Rav in Germany who wrote a famous commentary on the Mishnah called Tiferet Yisrael. And in the comment, he says, Ehovet Amlacha, when you choose a career, don't only be taken by the amount of money that the career promises to give you. Now, we're all dazzled by people that make big bucks. But the truth of the matter is, he said, that's not the only condition. Because you're talking about something you're going to spend your life doing. Make sure that when you choose a job, when you choose a career, it's got to be something that you like. Certainly not something that you despise. And many, many people, I think we all know people like that, who choose careers and they make a lot of money, but they hate it. And they wish they could have been doing something else, but they don't. My wife had a friend who, a teacher actually, whose father was a dentist. He was a successful dentist, but he was unhappy his entire life because he chose to be a dentist over being a teacher because and he hated being a dentist. So when you choose a career that you love, in any event. Let's go back to the question of the first question. Do things in order here. Ehavet hamlacha, is there value to work, or is there not? So, per se. So here we find that that Judaism has a very, very, very clear position on this issue, and the answer is yes. The answer is a decided yes. That labor per se, work per se, is a positive value. Now, according to the Mishnah, for example, the Mishnah in Kedushin, among the obligations of a father vis-a-vis his son is the duty to teach him a trade. Now, Rashi understood this use of the word mitzvah, lamda umanut, a trade, to denote that it's a specifically religious obligation. Now, it's not a pragmatic thing, just so you don't steal. There is a proactive, positive reason to teach your kid a trade. That's part of the mitzvah. One of the Mishnah defines it as one of the religious obligations that devolves upon the father vis-a-vis his children. Okay? To the extent, Rashi considers learning a trade to be so important that he says you're actually allowed to discuss a trade on Shabbos. Now, generally, we say no. The Torah has a clear prohibition, and those of you who learned Daf Yomi, there's at least 2 Blat Gemara, I think, if I remember correctly, on this question of what topics are not allowed to talk about on Shabbos. There's a famous Yiddish expression, "Nitaf Shabbos geret." We didn't say this on Shabbos. We're not allowed to talk about this on Shabbos. But talking about a trade, you're allowed. Why? Because you're allowed to talk on Shabbos. You're allowed to talk about things which are matters of mitzvah, and because they're matters of mitzvah, so usually we would say, I don't know, common affairs or Torah or whatever the case might be. But says no, Rashi, no. Rashi says that in fact discussing, if you want to go and, for example, apprentice your kid, as it used to be, to learn a trade or to get into a profession, you can discuss it on Shabbos because Rashi says, here I quote, "This is also a mitzvah. For one who does not teach him a trade is de facto teaching him to be a robber." Now, so therefore Rashi is saying that the utilitarian part of it makes it also into mitzvah. So the line apparently is a little bit what's the word is a bit flexible or a bit unclear. So it's a positive mitzvah to get a job. In addition, being I'm looking for, here we are, having a trade is something that is constructive, and being creative is a mandate in the Jewish religion. Rav Soloveitchik used to like to quote the blessing that was given by God to Adam in the first chapter in Genesis, where he says, "Pru urevu umilu et haaretz v'kivshuha." Be fruitful and multiply and fill the world and conquer it. And conquer it means to be creative, and creative requires having a trade, having a profession. So per se, the activity of having a profession, irrespective of that you love, I assume, irrespective of the amount of money you're going to make, which is also constructive, because if you have a constructive life, then you won't violate the social contract and then steal from other people. Now, in the Middle Ages, the ancient world and the medieval Christian world were somewhat more conflicted on this issue. Greco-Roman thought on the question of labor, as I said, is conflicted, because you have this Platonic ideal that the upper class should be the class of leisure. Maybe go out to conquer a couple of countries, but you should be able to rule and think great thoughts, and sort of the Platonic Academy, and you basically rely on the slaves to do the labor. People who are laborers were considered to be of a lower level. Things have changed. It's interesting. I did a quick search on Google today. In the medieval church, labor was, they had a very mixed idea about labor. On the one hand, because of the fact that part of the curse of Adam was that Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden didn't have to work. Everything was provided for them according to the way the church understood the Garden of Eden, and they just had to pluck the fruits off the trees. Of course, they plucked the wrong fruits off the trees, but that's another story. Once Adam and Eve get cursed, get thrown out of the garden. It says, by the sweat of your brow shall you work. Now that's a curse. Therefore, the church on the one hand thought that working was actually a curse. It was part of Adam's curse. And if life were the way it should be, then man wouldn't have to work. In fact, even what's striking is you have in medieval monasteries, for example, you have situations on the one hand where the ideal in the monasteries was the contemplative life in which work was not such a value. On the other hand, in many monastic orders, as far back as the Benedictines, you have the situation where the what's the word I'm looking for? The slogan of many of the monastic orders were ora et labora, that you pray and you work. Now, what the function of that work was is some question. Is it because it helps to to forgive your sins? Is it because it's healthy? Is it because it's positive value? Is it be creative? There's a mix here. There's a deep conflict among Jews. However, classically, there was no such conflict. That's the difference. Going out and working was in fact a positive good, which the Talmud makes very clear in many places, not just those areas that I mentioned in terms of Rashi. Now, you're going to tell me that there are these stories about rabbis who didn't work, and that the Rebbe Shimon Bar Yochai, who says better that if Jews would only behave, that they wouldn't have to support themselves. We will get to that hopefully next week. I will mention, though, however, as I said, I did a Google search before today's class, and I saw that overwhelmingly, certainly among, I wasn't able to find Catholic discussions, but among Protestants, work is considered to be a positive good. And that probably has to do with Calvinist theology and so on, which is not our topic right now, but there has been a shift. Actually making a living is a plus. Either way, it's clear that according to Shemaiah, Ehava Tamlacha, let's sum up, means that, according to most interpreters, means that work per se is a positive good because it helps to maintain the probity of society, because it helps provide people for what their basic needs. That choosing a trade is something which has inherent good in it, and need not conflict with one's Torah study, which we will talk about, as I said, next week. And that when you choose that trade or profession, it should be something that you love, because it's something you're going to be doing your entire life. To be continued. Everybody, please stay safe as usual. Please wear masks, social distance, don't get COVID. And Elena Kononova says, how would you give charity if you didn't work? And that is an excellent question, and that's another reason to give work. And as long as you ask the question, I really thank you for the question. I had I'm not going to mention names because I don't know if the family would be interested, but I had the benefit of knowing in years ago, not so much now, people of fantastic wealth. And one person I knew in particular said to me that the reason why they went to work and they worked hard to really make just fabulous amounts of money is because that if God was going to bless him with success, he wants to be able to use that success and to give tzedakah and to give charity, and that was part of his motivating factor. And his wife said to me that the reason why she married him, aside from the fact they were in love, but she was glad that he was a man of means, was because it really burned within her to do good works for the community, to give tzedakah, and the partnership that she would have with her husband was one that would allow for that. So yes, Elena, thank you very, very much. It's a very, very important point. So let us conclude here. We will see you next week. As always, I'm going to put this up on Facebook. Please feel free to share it. I encourage you to share it. The more, the better. If you have any questions, please ask me on Facebook Messenger or in the comments. If you want to, and I'm going to open myself up here. Anybody who's interested in continuing the conversation offline, you can, if you ask me on direct message, I will be happy to give you my email or even my phone number, and we can WhatsApp back and forth if something comes up. I'd like to keep this discussion going. So everybody have a great week, and we'll see you next time.